It's nice to follow another independent media agency. Canvas is as well. And as mentioned, my discipline within the agency is out of home. So today we're gonna walk you through a case study. It was an AI-powered digital out-of-home campaign that we partnered on with Kia. So there were several objectives that we were tasked with. The main thing we're gonna talk about today is the question that we had the opportunity to ask ourselves as an agency and kind of test out in the market based on the type of campaign that we were about to do. So really that question was, will deeper contextualization move the needle on key KPIs? So in this case, we're talking AI targeting, and we'll define that a little bit more as we go. Or we hit a point of diminishing returns with an already proven tactics within contextualization within out of home to date. So another way to look at it, did we take it too far, or to quote Barb from before, like were we too stalkerish in our approach? So we'll dive in. So the campaign was to promote the new flagship EV, the EV9. There were really three key distinguishing factors that set this vehicle apart from previous vehicles within the EV lineup. So there was the capabilities of the engine, but not just the engine, the overall car had advanced tech and capabilities and innovation. There was a third row. This was a first for the Kia EV lineup, so the largest vehicle to hit the markets to date. And then the bottom is kind of fancy brief speak to say that this was the highest price point Kia that will have gone out to market. So they really shattered their own price ceiling here. So how are we gonna help them tell a compelling story? Timing was on our side on this one because we got to capitalize on two big national broadcast marquee moments that Kia is a sponsor of. So we really had this opportunity to flip that traditional media script where outdoor serves as sometimes quite literally the wallpaper primer to add awareness before the content comes into the picture. So the two that led really here were New Year's Eve. So New Year's Eve, Kia is a sponsor of not only the Ryan Seacrest Rockin' New Year's Eve, but also the sponsor of the countdown clock for the ball drop itself. So fun fact, that's the most televised global ball drop. So they really doubled down there with also sponsoring the highest rated, most viewed in the States, Ryan Seacrest Rockin' New Year's Eve. And then this followed soon after with a very emotional Super Bowl ad. So again, how can we kind of leverage this momentum and convert this to not only sales, but just like elevating a little bit of perception out there about the brand. When looking to kind of like devise our key market list, considered a little bit more national, considered multi-regional, and then just for context, 10 markets plus and out of home is typically like qualifies a national program. So we decided to focus ultimately on the West region only. This really primed us for success in the sense that there is adoption on the West Coast already. There's a bigger ease for conversion. There's a better infrastructure there. So we landed on a top 5 market list that kind of sprinkled us down the West Coast region. So now moving on to planning the marketing campaign, we always knew we were gonna use digital outdoor for this. There was a need for dynamic storytelling. At bare minimum, there was gonna be multiple creative versions. You saw the different story talking points. That's a lot to put into one message. So we were gonna have to spread this out over the course of the campaign. So how could we do this and also add synergetic alignment, connecting the cities and the consumers and the product and the message? So I know, marketing mastermind over here, we advertise an EV vehicle on EV charging stations, but that's not the cool thing that we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about what was newer, not really well used yet, not everyone was super familiar with it, was the AI-powered Volta Vision that we were able to leverage for this campaign. So the automation of it all, pun intended, we really fell into 2 buckets here. So there's the footprint aspect, and then there's the creative allocation aspect. So we did consider programmatic. So I know we saw the Vistar logo. I just want to make it clear that this ultimately was not a programmatic campaign, as we really wanted to test and press and see what we could do on the AI front. And we didn't want to refine our audience targeting too much. It was also 5 markets, month and a half, 2-month campaign, not a ton of time to prove this out. So ultimately, we did the full footprint over the full course of time at the standard share of voice. And these 3 were the evergreen ads that ran. It was a sweet spot to hit on all the talking points. We talk exterior, interior here, and then it makes sure that the creative doesn't go too stale while it's out in the market. So now how do we take this contextual relevance or this one-to-many, the evergreen that's out there, and redefine it in this contextual precision, coining the V to V, so the volta to vehicle here, one-to-one. It's probably more like one-to-few, but for the purposes of this conversation, one-to-one, because we're really speaking to the driver. So now if there's not a car parked, you get an evergreen. If a Kia rolls up and parks at the charging station, you're served an ad that welcomes the Kia driver and calls out the key new updates that they want the driver to be aware of. If a non-Kia EV pulls into the space, they're greeted with a message, which in a very short message, they reiterate that third row twice. But one of the key challenges that they saw for conversion to a Kia model was if there's a need or a desire for a bigger EV, there just wasn't an option at the time, and now they wanted everyone to know that they are an option. So study. So to make sure we achieved our objectives and really like pressure tested ourselves and we're honest here, we looked across 2 studies and made sure really to pinpoint addressing that question that we mentioned in the beginning. So both ran in all 5 markets. It was a little north of 55 million overall impressions during that time. The study started when the campaign did, so the Monday after the Super Bowl. It ran for like a month and a half, 2 months. The sales attribution study went to the end of June. It's standard to go around plus 90 after the end of the campaign, just because of the decision that is being made in this situation. And then just one note I want to talk about super quickly on the brand study. I know everyone's excited about the results, but we'll just pause here quickly. So our questions were in the 30s. I think something that helped us tell a really good story on the back end and be honest and really understand what worked and maybe what didn't work here was the time and attention paid to the questions. So when we received the suggested survey, this went through Canvas Out of Home, Canvas Analytics, Volta Analytics, Fin, the partner, through InOcean, the other media agency involved, out to the client, and there were discussions about the word, about the sequencing of word. We added the max number of questions we were allowed to the survey. We asked the questions in the right way. So I know everyone probably in here has done at least one of these in their time, but this to me felt very different because everyone was like very involved, and we just made sure we asked really good questions to get really good answers that would give us the most meaningful data that we can pulse apart then to tell the stories. The sales attribution, like pretty self-explanatory here. We're just comparing 2 data sets, right? So we have the mix of did they pass, then we have the mix of the registration, then the mobile matching. So not much to say there. Success, long story short here, we were able to not only raise the perception of Kia as a brand, but of the Kia EV itself. We have a couple more stats a little bit deeper in the deck, but like even right here across awareness, consideration, and purchase intent, but did they buy? They did across the board. So Kia sales were up, Kia EV sales were up, and Kia EV9 sales were up, coming on the back end of this study. And a special, like another keynote that we took away from this that we found super interesting, and this aligned with other studies that we did, is if Kia is advertising for an EV out in the marketplace, it tends to elevate sales across Kia EVs. Price point might have been a consideration here, so that's maybe why there were some across EVs and not the EV9, but generally speaking, just raising the awareness of Kia and their EV lineup has raised sales. Clients are happy. Still a pretty curious agency though. Like, did the AI layer impact the KPIs truly? Did this contextual precision stalker targeting move the needle enough to dethrone that more like content contextual targeting in a little bit more of that synergistic type of way that we have seen proof of working in the past? So undoubtedly the crown here goes to AI. So not only were the metrics up like pretty much across the board in the study and in general and in comparison, but it really touched and reached out to consumers on like that cognitive and emotional level, and that's really where it resonates deep and you start to build that brand affinity past the brand awareness. And that's something that builds us a foundation that we can carry into the future. Like we can work with that and keep growing that. But we couldn't ignore the fact that we couldn't dethrone her completely because the content synergy, contextual alignment still very much did work here. So if AI is not an option for any given reason, or it's just not going to work for the campaign, we were still able to speak to paying a little bit more attention to the messaging and where you're placing the messaging, and the type of person that is looking at it in that environment really does still work. Questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, questions from the audience. I have a question.
Kate, over to your left.
Oh, okay. You go first.
Thank you guys, Jeff from Captify. I always ask digital out of home folks like how they're leveraging data and having a digital out of home buy. Just be curious in how what you're doing.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part?
So I'm curious to understand like how you're are you leveraging data in your digital out of home outside of like what we just went through here.
Gotcha.
I'm just
Okay,
curious in understanding like what type of like data sets you're using and how you're using data to like refine and target consumers and market and build your out of home campaign.
On our end, in the back-end testing, we're still looking for a better way past MMM. I know we talked about that a little bit before, and it's not really, doesn't quite fit for us and doesn't tell the best story. So how can we continually monitor and build those results into testings and learnings and then changings? Often, like sometimes, you know, we do these tests and it doesn't always move the needle for future campaigns. So how can we cycle back into it? So we're working on something that's a little more consistent. Right now, it's a little test and play to see what resonates the best to move the needle for the clients, so what's really valuable to them and the strategy teams. In terms on the front end of planning, it really depends on the category and what the objectives of the campaign are. So we'll either call on previous case studies that they can share with us and give us learnings and kind of pressure test there to see what has worked best, and we take it to the creative level too, because at the end of the day, we're a visual forum, so like that does matter. So best practices is something that we do a lot, and it's usually rooted in reaching out for prior data and studies on what has worked and has not worked. We know our kind of rules of thumb, which goes a little bit to programmatic versus standard buys, right? So that 1 to 4 weeks, the standard share of voice, and how do we balance that when we're talking about programmatic versus a standard outdoor campaign to make sure that we're still achieving a meaningful like reach and frequency, and how do we layer that? Yeah.
On that point, too, curious, are you interacting with your programmatic teams and understanding like how they're applying data and like how you can take some of what's working for them and applying in the digital out of home space?
Yeah, we are. It's been an open dialogue. The outdoor department to Canvas Worldwide is still sub 5 years, so we're still pretty young and new, and there's still a little habitual line stepping on what box does the programmatic out of home fall in. Right now, we all play nice in the sandbox together. Right now, sometimes it's them, sometimes it's us. So it's been mutual education, because we're dipping our toes further and further into the programmatic space where they're experts, but they're also coming into our space, and the way that outdoor should be planned is it's like skiing on the East Coast and skiing on the West Coast. It's kind of the same sport, but not really, right? So we have to look at it that way, and there has to be different layers and different approaches when in addition to the audience. Like that's a big element, but it can't be the only element when you're planning for outdoor.
Hi, Evan from Horizon. My question was kind of what you guys just talked about, but to add on to that, how you just were talking about how you are trying to collaborate really tightly with programmatic to inform each other and to kind of see where the best fit is with direct versus running it programmatic. I think the question I originally had was, what do you do with something like this? Obviously, the campaign you had made the most sense to run direct, and you had amazing results from that. So my question is kind of how do you take these awesome results, and then use that to then turn back around to the programmatic team or turn back around to your larger team and say, this is the insights that our specialized team got. Here's the strategy that we can kind of move forward to say, here's what you should take from what we did, and then maybe make that into some sort of programmatic digital out of home, or to inform programmatic CTV or something like that. How do you then take the results forward versus letting this case study kind of sit in a silo?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, we could do a little bit better of having communication flow. It doesn't not happen, but working on a system where it could be more consistent is something we're kind of figuring out still. It's more like the strategy team facing or client facing at this point than it is to the programmatic team. Also, because this wasn't a programmatic buy, but we also have had conversations because we've had programmatic requests because the clients think they want programmatic or it sounds a little sexier, and we take a look at the objectives, and a direct buy makes a lot more sense. So we plan both and then explain it with the numbers. So I think it's educating the programmatic team when those instances come up has been important too, because it's not like ultimately we're here to move the clients forward, so it's not always the best fit. We make sure that when we're reading the briefs that come through, we pull things like this back up to the front, even if they're not asking for something like this. So whether it's redirecting something in the brief or it's just kind of like adding it back in. But I think this, as a result of this, there was more consistent activity with Volta from Kia, and it expanded past the West Coast. So, and I was talking to different teams because we were talking to the tier 2 teams now. And it opened the door to have, even though this wasn't programmatic, sometimes the clients will reference it as such because we had those conversations, but it opened the door for broader programmatic outdoor because they saw that this worked.
All right, Kristi Hummel, thank you so much.